The first thing Morty noticed was the way the walls seemed to breathe, just slightly, like they had forgotten how still they were supposed to be. The air was warm and heavy with a quiet hum, almost a lullaby he couldn't quite place, and it made him feel like the room itself was watching over him. It was strange, of course, everything felt strange, but not in a scary way. There was a soft, invisible hand resting gently on his shoulder, a comfort he hadn't realized he needed until this exact moment. And that's when he felt it. A gentle pull, a kind of knowing that someone somewhere, or maybe everyone, truly cared about him, and about you, right now, wherever you are. We truly love and care about you, and we're so glad you're here with us tonight. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Morty blinked at the shimmer in the corner of his room. For a moment he thought it might be a trick of the light or a reflection from the stars outside the window, but it pulsed softly, like a heart beating slowly in sync with his own. He felt drawn toward it, though he couldn't explain why. The familiar objects in his room, the posters, the books, the little jar of mismatched pens, seemed to soften, edges rounding in the glow, and the air smelled faintly of warm bread and distant rain. He took a step closer, and the shimmer didn't retreat. It stayed, patient and quiet, as if it had been waiting for him to notice. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he pulled the covers close, the fabric rough against his skin but comforting all the same. He wondered if Rick would notice the change in the room, if he would mutter something dismissive about multiversal flux or temporal drift. But right now, Morty didn't care. This moment wasn't about experiments or calculations. It was about stillness, about listening to a world that sometimes moved too fast. The shimmer whispered softly, brushing against his consciousness like a gentle tide. It didn't speak words he could understand, not exactly, but he understood its intention. There was nothing to fear here, only a quiet invitation to breathe. Outside the window, the night was thick with stars. Each one seemed to hum a little note, a melody so soft he wasn't sure if he was hearing it or feeling it against his chest. He thought about all the times he had looked at the sky before, sometimes scared, sometimes restless, always wondering where he fit, but tonight it felt familiar, like a lullaby repeated over and over until it sank into his bones. The stars flickered in patterns he couldn't name, tracing invisible maps that hinted at journeys he had yet to take. He thought of Rick, of Jerry, of Summer, and even Beth, and realized that even when they weren't near, the essence of their care lingered like a soft echo, brushing against his heart. Morty stretched his arms, slow and careful, as if moving too quickly might shatter the fragile calm that wrapped around him. He felt the floor beneath his bare feet, the slight creak of the bed frame, the hum of the night outside, and in it, a strange sense of connection. He wasn't alone. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. Somewhere beyond the shimmer, the multiverse breathed, vast and mysterious, but somehow, in this quiet room, it felt like it had shrunk to fit just him. The thought made him smile faintly, a small curve that felt like a secret shared between himself and the universe. A gentle warmth brushed his cheeks, like the memory of a soft sunbeam on a forgotten summer afternoon. Morty closed his eyes and let himself fall into it, letting each thought float by like clouds, soft and slow, without holding on to anything too tightly. He remembered the first time he had felt truly small in the multiverse, the first time the endless possibilities had scared him. And yet, here he was, older now, quieter, beginning to understand that the vastness wasn't meant to frighten him, it was meant to cradle him, to remind him that even in the infinite there was room for gentle, patient care. The shimmer blinked once more, soft and deliberate, before dissolving into a pool of silver light that spread across the room like mist. Morty felt it slide over his shoulders, down his arms, curling around his legs, and he realized it wasn't just the room that was alive. He was alive, fully and completely, in a way that felt new and ancient at once. There was no rush, no expectation, no need for him to prove himself. The night was his, and within it, a kind of quiet adventure waited. He just had to breathe and notice. He lay back against the pillows, the shimmer now a warm glow around the edges of his vision. His heart slowed, his thoughts softened, and a gentle curiosity settled in its place. The multiverse, vast and strange, didn't demand anything from him tonight. It simply existed alongside him, humming its soft, invisible song. And Morty, feeling the rhythm of it in his chest, let himself drift into the calm. The last thing he felt before sleep began to wrap him in its arms was a gentle certainty. He was cared for, he was safe, and somehow, this night, the first night alone in the multiverse, was perfect, exactly as it was. Morty remembered the small, peculiar ways his childhood had unfolded, as if it had been stitched together from soft, half-forgotten dreams. Even the moments that seemed ordinary, running through the yard, fumbling with his backpack, trying to keep up with Summer's teasing, carried an odd weight, a quiet significance he hadn't noticed until now. He could see himself in those moments, smaller and unsure, but always reaching, always curious, as though the world itself had been urging him to pay attention. Sometimes he would sit in the corner of his room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about nothing and everything all at once. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the house, the faint rustle of leaves outside. These were his companions, whispering gentle reminders that life moved slowly, even when it seemed chaotic. And he began to understand that these tiny observations mattered, that noticing the subtle rhythms of the world had been teaching him something about patience, about the quiet ways we grow. He thought of Rick, of course. Not with anger or frustration tonight, but with a soft, reflective curiosity. Rick had always been loud and chaotic, a storm that seemed to fill every corner of their lives, but Morty now realized that in the storm there had been lessons hidden between the lightning flashes. The hurried trips, the strange gadgets, the moments of panic, they were all part of a strange, imperfect education in resilience, in empathy, in understanding that life could be both terrifying and wondrous at once. Morty's earliest memories of adventure often felt like fragments of a dream, bright and blurry at the edges. He remembered the first time he had wandered too far in the backyard and found a tiny, trembling bird in the grass. His hands had been small, his movements clumsy, but he had gently cupped it and carried it inside, whispering soft assurances he barely understood himself. That moment had felt monumental, though he hadn't known why. Now he understood. It was the beginning of his quiet empathy, the first thread of a tapestry that stretched across every strange encounter, every soft miracle, and every act of gentle care he would offer the multiverse. He also remembered moments of awkwardness, of fear, of not quite belonging. Summer laughing at his clumsy attempts to follow along, Jerry's well-meaning but fumbling reassurances, the weight of expectations he could never meet. And yet, even in those moments, there had been tenderness, small glimmers of connection. He could recall the nights when Beth had tucked him in, smoothing back his hair and humming a lullaby he didn't fully understand at the time. The memory of her voice now wrapped around him like a warm blanket, a soft echo of home. The strange, whimsical nature of his childhood often carried him into worlds that were almost invisible to others. He could remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and imagining doors that led to somewhere else, places where shadows had soft edges and the stars whispered secrets. Sometimes he would find small creatures under the floorboards, or hear voices in the wind, faint and musical, reminding him that the world was far larger than he could see. Those early experiences had taught him something subtle but powerful: to pay attention, to move gently, and to trust that wonder often appeared in quiet, unnoticed corners. As Morty grew, those childhood curiosities became deeper threads, winding through the way he approached the world. Small habits, pausing to watch a sunset, leaving crumbs for a visiting bird, listening intently when someone spoke, were not learned through instruction, but through quiet observation. Each act, each thought shaped him. They were the first moments of becoming who he was, moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but now glimmered with the soft glow of memory. Like fireflies caught in a jar, he smiled faintly, remembering a particular evening when Rick had left him alone with a device that shimmered faintly in the corner. Morty had been scared, unsure, yet something in him rose quietly, steadily. He had leaned closer, breathed slowly, and in doing so had discovered something remarkable, not just the device's purpose, but a new awareness of himself. That awareness, delicate and unhurried, had whispered that courage didn't have to roar. It could simply be present, patient, a gentle companion in the quiet hours. The night outside pressed gently against the window, dark but not empty. The faint rustling of leaves and distant hum of traffic mingled with the whisper of his own breathing. Morty could feel the rhythm of his life stretching backward into these childhood memories, backward into the soft, formative moments that had quietly shaped him. And he realized that growth didn't always announce itself with fireworks or dramatic turns. It often arrived like a gentle tide, carrying lessons in its slow, invisible current. He let himself sink deeper into the calm, feeling each memory as if it were a soft note in a lullaby meant just for him. The warmth of his blankets, the quiet hum of the night, the lingering shimmer from moments long past, all of it combined into a soft, meditative peace. Morty understood with a gentle certainty that he had always been learning, always growing, even when he hadn't known it. The small quirks, the shy kindnesses, the quiet courage, they were his, and they had quietly prepared him for the strange, infinite night that awaited beyond his window. The last thing he felt before sleep began to fold around him was gratitude for the little miracles of childhood, for the unseen lessons, for the soft threads of connection that wove through every day. And he let his thoughts drift like clouds across the night sky, unhurried, unbound, fully present in the comfort of what had been and the gentle promise of what was to come. Morty had begun to notice small things he had never understood before. It started subtly with a glance at someone's expression or the soft sigh of a being passing by in the multiverse. He realized, almost by accident, that he could feel more than just the surface. He could feel the edges of sadness, the tremors of quiet fear, and even the faint hum of contentment. It was like a delicate tuning fork had been placed inside him, resonating with the emotions of others in ways he had not known were possible. The first time it happened, he had been wandering through a silent corridor of shifting lights, walls, curving and twisting as if they were breathing along with him. He sensed someone standing at the edge of the corridor, trembling in uncertainty. Morty didn't know who they were, and yet he understood them. Not with words, not with gestures, but with something softer, deeper, a quiet whisper in his chest. He approached slowly, heart steady, and offered a gentle smile. The other being's tension eased, as if they had been waiting for him to notice. This subtle gift, or perhaps it was a natural part of him he had only just discovered, brought with it a quiet purpose. Morty realized that he could make a difference not by grand gestures or loud declarations, but through small acts of care and awareness. The hum of the multiverse seemed to respond to him, soft and approving, and he began to understand that empathy, in its purest form, could be a kind of magic. Not the kind that exploded in bright colors or shook worlds, but a soft, steady light that guided lost things toward home. He spent hours in this newfound awareness, observing without judgment. Sometimes he would see a tiny creature curled in the corner of a shifting room, its eyes wide and unsure, and he would leave a comforting note or a small offering of warmth. Sometimes he would encounter a lost traveler, trembling from the weight of worlds, and simply walk beside them until the trembling eased. Each time he felt a soft satisfaction ripple through him, a gentle proof that he could matter, quietly, profoundly, in ways the universe itself could barely notice. The lessons were subtle, often unremarked by others. Morty would watch a being's shadow straighten, or see a faint flicker of trust bloom in uncertain eyes, and he would feel something swell in his chest, a mix of wonder, humility, and quiet pride. It was not the pride of accomplishment, of trophies or applause, but the soft satisfaction of recognizing that presence and attention could heal small fractures in the hearts of others. These were the beginnings of a hero's journey, though it lacked fanfare. There were no battles, no armies, only moments of care stretching quietly through the endless night. One evening, as Morty wandered beneath a canopy of silver light, he stumbled across a small, trembling creature tucked in the folds of an invisible corridor. Its eyes were wide, liquid with uncertainty, and Morty knelt beside it, heart calm and hands steady. He whispered words that were almost songs, though he didn't know the words themselves mattered. He hummed a soft melody that seemed to harmonize with the corridor's shifting walls, and the creature leaned into him, trusting, fragile, small. Morty felt a gentle exhale ripple through his chest, a recognition that kindness was sometimes the quietest, most profound magic of all. That night, lying on a soft ledge overlooking a universe stretched thin like silken threads, Morty thought about how much he had grown. The boy who had once stumbled over every decision, who had feared the chaos of Rick's inventions and the weight of infinite worlds, was beginning to move with care and awareness. He understood now that power was not the ability to change everything, but the ability to notice, to respond, and to offer comfort when it was needed most. He had discovered that he could touch a heart without touching it at all, a quiet miracle that pulsed like a faint star in the vast darkness. The multiverse seemed to hum along with him, a soft accompaniment to his thoughts. Patterns of light flickered like gentle fireflies, and he realized that even the smallest gestures repeated quietly had meaning. The universe itself did not demand perfection, only presence. Morty could feel the threads of connection stretching from him to every creature he had encountered, threads that shimmered softly with trust and recognition. He understood, in a slow and meditative way, that this quiet magic would guide him through the nights to come, carrying him through the strange, endless tapestry of worlds with gentle hands. As sleep began to draw him close, Morty felt the familiar warmth of care lingering in the air. It was not the presence of another being, not exactly, but the sense of shared understanding, of attention and love rippling through invisible channels. He breathed in slowly, feeling the pulse of the multiverse echoing in his chest, and allowed himself to drift. The corridors of light, the shimmering creatures, the quiet hum of empathy, they all folded softly around him, carrying him into rest. And in that gentle fold, he realized that the first quiet miracles of his life had been building toward this moment. The awareness that even alone, he was never truly alone, that small acts of care could ripple farther than he could see, and that his heart, stretched carefully and gently, was enough to touch worlds without ever leaving his bed. Morty had begun to notice the threads that connected him to others, fragile yet unbreakable. They were subtle, like the faint shimmer of morning light through a dusty window, but they carried weight he could feel in his chest. He thought first of Rick, whose care had always been hidden beneath layers of chaos and brusque words. Rick was unpredictable, sometimes frightening, often frustrating. Yet Morty now understood that even in the whirlwind of his grandfather's actions, there was a steady presence, an undercurrent of guidance, quiet and persistent, always watching, always tethered. There was also a friend, one he had never expected to find, a small, peculiar creature who had appeared in one of the softer corridors of the multiverse, trembling but curious. Its eyes reflected the same uncertainty Morty had once carried, and, in seeing himself mirrored, he reached out with careful patience. They didn't need words to understand each other. A glance, a shared silence, a gentle touch of a hand or paw was enough. Morty felt that the bond grew with each passing day, a quiet tether that anchored him even when the worlds stretched endlessly outward, threatening to pull him away into isolation. He thought of the other connections too, the fleeting encounters with beings who needed nothing more than a moment of attention or a soft word. Morty learned that relationships weren't always built in dramatic gestures or long conversations. Sometimes they formed in shared pauses, in noticing the small hesitations, in leaving space for others to breathe. A soft hum of mutual understanding was enough to sustain them, delicate yet enduring. Morty began to see that these quiet bonds were a kind of map, a guide through the infinite, and that each connection mattered, no matter how subtle. The corridors of the multiverse stretched endlessly, walls curving and pulsing as if alive. Morty walked them with care, noticing details that others might miss, the soft rustle of a creature's wings, the faint echo of laughter in the distance, the shimmer of forgotten stars overhead. Each observation deepened his awareness, teaching him to approach the world with gentleness, patience, and attentiveness. The multiverse itself seemed to respond to him, shifting subtly in his presence, guiding him toward those who needed him, and in doing so reinforcing the quiet power of empathy. One evening, as silver light pooled across a soft, undulating floor, Morty encountered a creature that was both familiar and strange. Its eyes held a question, a longing, and a touch of fear, and Morty felt a pulse of recognition, a mirror of his own vulnerabilities. He knelt beside it, whispered a song he had learned from the winds of distant worlds, and felt the creature relax. Its tiny form pressed closer, seeking warmth, seeking acknowledgement, seeking simply to be seen. Morty understood, as he had begun, to understand so many times before, that seeing and being seen were acts of quiet magic. He thought, as he often did during these calm excursions, of the importance of presence. It was not enough to act. He had to be present, fully, with attention and care. The soft bonds he nurtured were not built in haste or expectation, but in patience and observation. Even the smallest gestures, a nod, a smile, a gentle pat on a trembling shoulder, could resonate far beyond the moment, like ripples across a still pond. Morty felt the weight of this realization lightly, not as a burden, but as a comforting truth that carried him through the corridors of light and shadow alike. Morty also began to notice the subtle ways his companions shaped him. Rick's quiet insistence that he observe, that he question, that he move gently even through chaos, had formed a foundation he hadn't understood as a child. And his small, peculiar friend, the creature with trembling eyes, taught him softness, patience, and the courage to approach uncertainty with care. Morty realized that relationships were mirrors, each one reflecting parts of himself he hadn't yet recognized, offering insight and comfort in equal measure. The night stretched endlessly, yet it was soft and comforting rather than oppressive. Morty felt a deep satisfaction in this quiet existence, a slow awareness of the bonds he was nurturing, and a gentle confidence in the small acts of care he offered. The multiverse pulsed around him, alive in ways that were subtle and profound, but he felt no urgency, no need to conquer or control. It was enough simply to move through it gently, observing, noticing, and connecting, leaving trails of warmth wherever he went. As he rested on a ledge overlooking a soft cascade of shimmering light, Morty allowed himself to reflect on the tapestry of relationships that had quietly grown around him. He saw the invisible threads connecting him to Rick, to his peculiar friend, to the countless beings who relied on nothing more than his presence. These threads were delicate, but they were strong, and in recognizing them, Morty felt a deep, gentle awe for the way life wove itself, quietly and endlessly, through countless forms and moments. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum of the multiverse, feeling it resonate with the heartbeat of his own growing awareness. The quiet bonds, the small gestures, the gentle acts of understanding, they were his magic, his legacy, even in this moment. And as sleep began to fold around him, soft and unhurried, he realized that he was never truly alone. The connections he had nurtured, the empathy he had practiced, the quiet love he had offered, they would follow him, silently, across corridors and worlds, carrying him into dreams as endless and gentle as the night itself. Morty walked through corridors that seemed to ripple with quiet life, the walls soft and slightly luminous, like mist that had learned to hold its shape. The air smelled faintly of rain on stone, and the distant sweetness of flowers he had never seen, and it carried with it a gentle hum, almost like a song half remembered from childhood. Each step he took felt measured, thoughtful, as if the universe itself had slowed its pulse to match his own. In this quiet space, he noticed things others might overlook. A shadow trembling at the edge of a doorway, a flicker of light moving like a whisper across the floor, the faint echo of laughter somewhere far away. He paused near a pool of silver light that shimmered like liquid glass. Morty could see his reflection, but it wasn't just him. There were echoes of the other versions of himself. Children and teenagers and young men, all curious, all cautious, all learning in small, quiet ways. It was almost dizzying, the awareness that he was not just one being in one moment, but part of a vast, stretching network of possibilities. And yet somehow the knowledge did not frighten him. Instead, it felt like an invitation, a reminder that every small act of care, every gentle observation, could ripple across the infinite spaces between stars. A tiny creature emerged from the mist nearby, its eyes wide and cautious. Morty bent down slowly, careful not to startle it. "It's okay," he whispered, though he was unsure if it understood words. It leaned closer, tentatively, and he reached out a hand, letting it brush against him in quiet trust. That simple contact, so unremarkable and yet so profound, reminded Morty that connection often required no explanation. Presence was enough. Attention was enough. A gentle touch, a shared silence, a soft note of reassurance, these were the things that could heal more than any words ever could. He wandered further, noticing the hidden rhythms of the multiverse. Soft lights pulsed in patterns that almost resembled breathing. Shadows danced quietly on the edges of walls, moving with a kind of grace that felt intentional and tender. Morty realized that the multiverse was alive not in the dramatic ways he had always expected, but in subtle, patient movements, in quiet harmonies that required careful observation to notice. Each small flicker, each delicate shift, felt like a secret whispered just to him, a reminder that the world was more gentle and more intricate than he had ever allowed himself to see. Morty thought about the small gestures that had shaped him, Rick's impatient but consistent guidance, the reassurance of his parents when they remembered to look closely, the tiny acts of trust and care from friends he barely understood. Each moment, once seemingly inconsequential, now felt like a note in a quiet symphony, a pattern that had led him to this night, this room, this awareness. He could feel the threads stretching outward, reaching toward beings who might need his attention, his presence, his quiet understanding. The thought brought a soft swell of warmth in his chest. He found himself at the edge of a corridor that opened into a vast expanse of floating lights, soft spheres drifting gently like lanterns on a windless evening. Morty reached out, and one of the lights hovered closer, brushing against his fingertips with a faint warmth. He realized that the multiverse, vast and endless, responded to small gestures just as the smallest beings did. Presence and care were not limited by scale. The infinite spaces and the tiniest creatures were equally touched by attention, by gentle observation, by the quiet magic of noticing. Morty rested on a smooth stone ledge, watching the spheres drift lazily around him. The silence was not empty. It was full of the hum of unseen life and the faint echo of countless whispered songs. He thought about the bonds he had nurtured so far, the peculiar creature that had become his companion, the unseen threads connecting him to Rick, to Summer, to those he had met fleetingly, yet remembered fully. Each bond carried meaning, and he felt a steady gratitude for the slow unfolding of trust and care. In the distance, faint shapes moved behind layers of light and shadow. Beings who were learning and wondering just as he was. Morty smiled softly, recognizing himself in them, and feeling that the multiverse, in all its strangeness, was not so lonely after all. Even in its vastness, even in its quiet mysteries, connection persisted, delicate and enduring. He could see now that the act of noticing, of attending, of being present, created ripples stronger than any force he had imagined as a child. As the gentle hours passed, Morty felt a soft exhale ripple through his chest. He understood that these quiet adventures were as significant as any grand journey. They were his growth, his magic, his understanding of the multiverse and his own heart. The night pressed in softly, embracing him with warmth and calm, and he let his thoughts drift like the spheres around him, gentle and unhurried. The hum of existence wrapped him in safety, and he allowed himself to rest, knowing that he was cared for, that his presence mattered, and that the small gestures of his heart had power in ways both visible and unseen. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Morty closed his eyes, letting the shimmer of lights, the whispers of distant laughter, and the pulse of life around him carry him gently towards sleep, soft and slow, ready to dream, ready to grow, ready to notice again when the morning or the next corridor arrived. Morty had begun to understand that small acts could carry weight far beyond what he expected. It wasn't about heroism in the loud, dramatic sense he had once imagined. It was about the quiet moments, the gestures that passed almost unnoticed, but left a lasting impression. A simple smile, a gentle word, a hand extended at the right moment. These were the threads that wove the fabric of connection through the multiverse. He had come to see that presence itself, steady and attentive, was a kind of quiet magic. One afternoon, as he wandered through a corridor that bent light like liquid, Morty noticed a faint flicker beneath a stone ledge. Curious, he leaned closer and found a tiny creature, trembling, its eyes wide with unease. Morty knelt down slowly, careful not to startle it. "Hey," he said softly, though the word felt small and inadequate. Still, the creature leaned closer, sensing the calm in his voice, and Morty realized again that words weren't always necessary. Sometimes just being there, steady and gentle, was enough to ease fear and bring comfort. He moved through the corridors with patience, learning to observe before acting. Each creature he encountered, each flicker of light or shadow, offered an opportunity for a small act of care. Morty discovered that he could guide beings without pushing, comfort them without speaking, and restore balance through quiet attention. The multiverse responded in subtle ways. Lights glimmered brighter, shadows softened, a faint hum lingered in the air, like a melody that had been waiting for him to notice. Morty thought often of Rick, who had taught him that observation mattered, though not in words meant to soothe. Rick's lessons had been hidden beneath chaos and impatience, but Morty now recognized their quiet depth. To pay attention, to notice the unseen, to move carefully and thoughtfully, these were the tools Rick had given him, and they were more powerful than any gadget or invention. The wisdom was quiet, yet it shaped the way he moved through every corridor folding around him like soft light. One evening, Morty found himself beside a dimly glowing pool, its surface reflecting countless stars from elsewhere in the multiverse. A small creature had become trapped there, its fragile form slipping on the edge of the shimmering water. Morty extended a hand slowly, and it reached toward him with hesitant trust. He guided it gently, speaking soft words that blended with the hum of the universe. When the creature stepped safely onto solid ground, Morty felt the quiet satisfaction ripple through him, a reminder that heroism could be still, gentle, and unseen. He also began to notice that small gestures could echo far beyond the moment. A comforting touch, a shared laugh, a smile offered at just the right time. They left faint, lingering traces that could guide others, sometimes in ways he would never witness. Morty understood that these quiet acts of care were not about recognition or reward. They were about connection, about leaving the multiverse slightly warmer, slightly safer, slightly more alive than it had been before. The realization settled in his chest like a slow, comforting heartbeat. The corridors stretched endlessly, filled with lights and shadows that seemed to breathe. Morty moved among them, calm and observant, leaving subtle traces of care wherever he went. He noticed the smallest things, a shadow straightening, a trembling creature calming, a faint glow returning to a dim corner. Each act, though unremarkable on its own, built a rhythm, a quiet song of empathy that hummed beneath the surface of the multiverse. He felt part of a larger melody, gentle and enduring, one that required patience, presence, and care. As he paused to rest on a smooth ledge, Morty reflected on the bonds he had nurtured, the small friend who trusted him, the distant but steady presence of Rick, the invisible threads connecting him to countless beings he had met along the way. Each relationship, delicate and subtle, carried meaning and strength. Morty understood that life was not always about dramatic triumphs. Sometimes it was about noticing, listening, and acting gently, letting kindness ripple quietly through the worlds around him. The night pressed softly against the corridors, carrying the faint hum of distant laughter and the gentle glimmer of countless stars. Morty felt the weight of the multiverse, vast and infinite, and yet he also felt its tenderness, a reminder that even the smallest acts mattered. He breathed slowly, allowing himself to sink into the quiet, absorbing the warmth and resonance of the worlds around him. Presence, patience, care, these were the threads he would follow, the quiet magic that would guide him through every corridor, every encounter, every night. And as the soft glow of the multiverse surrounded him, Morty let himself drift into rest, feeling the gentle hum of connection, the quiet pulse of life, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that his small acts of care were enough to ripple across infinite spaces. He closed his eyes, wrapped in calm, and allowed the corridors, the creatures, and the soft light to carry him gently towards sleep, slow and unhurried, safe and deeply seen. Morty walked slowly along a corridor that bent and curved like soft water, noticing the reflections of himself in the glassy surfaces. But these reflections were not just mirrors. They were echoes of other Mortys, versions of himself shaped by different choices and quiet moments he had never taken. Some looked anxious, others hesitant, a few calm and certain. He watched them without judgment, simply observing, and he realized that each reflection carried a lesson, a memory, a whisper of possibility. The multiverse was showing him what had been, what might have been, and what could still be. He paused in front of one reflection, a version of himself younger and trembling, who had once feared the vastness of the universe and the weight of expectations. Morty reached out, not expecting the reflection to respond, and yet he felt a gentle warmth bloom in the air, as though acknowledgement alone could soothe the edges of fear. He whispered softly, "It's okay. You're allowed to be small. You're allowed to learn. You're allowed to grow." The reflection seemed to lean closer, absorbing the words, the tone, the presence. And Morty felt a quiet ache of empathy ripple through him. As he continued walking, he noticed other echoes, some of decisions he had made with hesitation, some of moments he had overlooked, some of choices that had quietly shaped him without his noticing. And yet the most powerful realization was not about regret or triumph. It was about presence, awareness, and the gentle acknowledgement of who he was at every point in time. Each version of himself was a thread in the fabric of his growth, and by observing them, he wove these threads together into a tapestry that was uniquely his. The corridors shimmered softly, walls folding and unfolding like the slow breathing of a great creature. Morty's companion, the small creature he had befriended, padded alongside him, silent but attentive, as if feeling the importance of this reflection. There was no urgency, no demand for action. The moment was quiet, patient, a soft meditation made tangible. Morty realized that growth was not always a sequence of grand adventures. It was often an accumulation of subtle choices, attentive presence, and the courage to notice, to observe, and to care. He came across a pool of silver light where reflections rippled like liquid stars. Morty knelt beside it and saw countless possibilities shimmering in its surface. Moments where he had acted too quickly, moments where he had lingered just long enough, moments that had changed, little yet meant everything. He reached out, touching the surface gently, and felt a resonance, a quiet hum that vibrated through him, affirming that even unseen actions had power. Each choice, no matter how small, left ripples in the fabric of the multiverse, gentle but enduring. Morty thought about the beings he had helped along his quiet journeys, the trembling creatures, the lost travelers, the companions who had needed nothing more than his calm presence. He realized that just as he had learned from observing himself, others learned from his attention and care. His small acts of guidance, patience, and kindness had created echoes, subtle but persistent, stretching across worlds he could not even name. The thought made his chest swell with quiet satisfaction, a realization that his journey was meaningful without needing loud recognition. He paused again, breathing slowly, feeling the rhythm of the multiverse around him. Lights flickered in soft patterns, shadows bent tenderly, and the air vibrated faintly with unseen songs. Morty understood now that even in the infinite expanse, attention and awareness could anchor him, could offer stability, and could create connection. Reflection, both literal and metaphorical, had become a tool for understanding himself, for understanding others, and for weaving a gentle magic that carried him forward. As he rose and continued along the corridor, Morty let his thoughts drift like clouds across a twilight sky. He acknowledged the past versions of himself, welcomed them without judgment, and felt a quiet unity forming within him. Each reflection was a reminder of growth, of learning, of patience, and of empathy. The soft, undulating lights of the corridors seemed to pulse in harmony with his heartbeat, reassuring him that the universe was vast but tender, and that even the smallest awareness could ripple outward with lasting effect. When he finally rested on a ledge overlooking a cluster of floating lights, Morty closed his eyes and let himself exhale slowly. He felt a sense of completeness, not in achievement, but in recognition of the threads that connected him to himself, to others, and to the multiverse itself. The echoes of reflection, the gentle hum of presence, the quiet understanding of growth, they wrapped around him like a warm blanket, lulling him closer to rest. And as sleep began to fold gently around him, Morty felt the certainty of care, connection, and quiet wonder settling softly in his heart. Morty moved through the corridors of the multiverse with a quiet awareness he had not known before. The walls shimmered with soft, shifting colors like sunlight spilling across water, and every step he took felt deliberate, tender, and connected. He realized that the universe did not demand his speed or his cleverness. It only asked that he notice, that he breathe, and that he respond with care. The gentle pulse of existence hummed in time with his own heartbeat, and Morty felt that he was a part of something far larger, yet deeply personal. In the distance, a faint glow drew him toward a field of drifting lights, tiny spheres that floated like lanterns in a night sky. He paused, inhaling the quiet of the space, and felt a resonance in his chest, a subtle alignment with the rhythm of the multiverse. Each light seemed to carry a story, a whisper of someone's thoughts, a trace of their presence, and Morty understood that connection was not always about words or action. Sometimes it was enough to exist attentively, quietly, in the same space. He reached out a hand, and one of the lights hovered close, brushing against his fingertips with a warmth that felt like recognition. Morty smiled softly, feeling the simple joy of interaction, a connection without complexity, without need for explanation. This gentle, quiet awareness had become his gift, and he began to sense it in every corridor he passed, in every creature he encountered, in the subtlest flickers of movement and sound. Empathy, he realized, was not an act. It was a state of being, an openness to noticing the quiet threads that wove through all things. As he wandered further, he came across a creature perched on a ledge, small and trembling. Morty knelt beside it, careful not to startle, and hummed a soft melody he had learned from the corridors themselves. The creature tilted its head, listening, then leaned into him, seeking warmth and reassurance. Morty felt a swell of quiet satisfaction, a confirmation that attention and care, even in the smallest acts, could create profound effects. The hum of the multiverse seemed to pulse with him, soft and approving, as if acknowledging that growth and connection were occurring, not with grand gestures, but with patience and presence. He thought about Rick, about the lessons hidden beneath chaos, beneath impatience and distraction. Rick had taught him to look closely, to notice, to observe. Morty now understood that these teachings were subtle and slow, like seeds planted in quiet soil, germinating only when the time was right. Observing, noticing, and acting gently. These were the foundations of a quiet heroism that required no recognition, no reward, only awareness and care. Morty walked along a bridge of light that stretched into soft darkness, and he noticed other beings moving in silence. Each one carried its own weight, its own story, and Morty felt their presence without needing to speak. He realized that attention was a form of companionship, and that simply noticing the existence of another was a kind of empathy as potent as any act of aid. He let the thought settle in his chest, soft and warm, and felt a deep satisfaction in the subtle, unspoken bonds forming around him. The corridors continued to fold and curve like gentle waves, guiding him past reflections of himself, past floating lights, past creatures who needed only his calm presence. Morty understood that the multiverse did not rush, did not demand urgency. It moved at its own pace, and he could move with it, slowly, attentively, in a way that allowed him to absorb, to care, to grow. Presence itself became his meditation, a rhythm he could follow without strain or expectation. As he rested on a smooth ledge overlooking a vast cluster of floating lights, Morty closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He felt the hum of connection in every corner of his awareness, a resonance that stretched through corridors, shadows, and shimmering spheres. The soft pulse of the multiverse wrapped around him like a blanket, steady and gentle. And he realized that quiet wonder, attentiveness, and empathy were enough to navigate any expanse, any uncertainty, any infinite night. And as sleep began to settle around him, wrapping him in calm, Morty felt a profound sense of awe and comfort. He was connected, seen, and aware, and the corridors, creatures, and gentle light of the multiverse whispered their soft approval. He exhaled slowly, letting the resonance fill him, allowing the quiet hum of existence to carry him gently into rest, a soft, unhurried journey into dreams. Morty began to notice the familiar faces of friends he had made along his quiet journeys. Though some were fleeting, some were subtle, and some were strange beyond recognition. They moved through the corridors of the multiverse with him, sometimes visible, sometimes only sensed, yet always present. Each interaction carried a quiet weight, a resonance that touched his chest in a way words could never achieve. Connection, he realized, was often invisible, a gentle thread that could stretch across vast spaces without ever breaking. He approached one companion, a small creature whose trembling had once been constant, but now softened in his presence. Morty knelt and offered a gentle smile, and the creature leaned closer, resting against him without fear. There was no need for speech. The communication was in the shared stillness, in the mutual understanding that neither needed to explain themselves fully. Morty felt warmth bloom in his chest, the soft glow of satisfaction that came from nurturing bonds through patience and gentle attention. He thought of the bonds he had with beings he barely knew, yet somehow trusted. With Rick, who remained distant but tethered in subtle ways, and with creatures and echoes of others who had passed through his corridors. Each bond was a thread, delicate yet resilient, and Morty began to understand that connection did not require intensity or drama. It required observation, presence, and the quiet willingness to care. Even a small act, a shared glance, a careful touch, a whispered melody could ripple outward, echoing in ways he might never see. The corridors stretched endlessly, bending light and sound like water, and Morty walked among them slowly, noticing how shadows softened when he moved with attention. The floating lights he had encountered before shimmered in patterns that felt almost like laughter, and he realized that even the smallest gestures of recognition could brighten a corner of the multiverse. A gentle wave of the hand, a nod of acknowledgement, the calm presence of someone who noticed. These were the subtle tools of companionship and care. Morty paused near a softly glowing archway and watched another being approach. Its form was uncertain, wavering like mist, yet Morty could sense its quiet curiosity. He extended a hand and let the creature lean into it, a small act of trust and reassurance. The warmth he felt in response confirmed a lesson he had been learning for some time, that companionship could exist without words, that the presence of another being could create safety and understanding in ways both profound and subtle. He wandered further, reflecting on the invisible bonds that had carried him this far. There was a quiet satisfaction in recognizing the ways he had been noticed as a child, as a teenager, and even now. The attention and care offered by others, no matter how small, had shaped him, just as his own care shaped the multiverse around him. Morty realized that life was a network of these quiet exchanges, delicate but enduring, like threads of light weaving together a tapestry that spanned worlds. As he continued, he noticed familiar motifs returning, the shimmer of stars in pools of light, the gentle hum of corridors, the soft rustle of unseen wings. Each familiar note brought comfort, a sense of continuity in the vastness, a reminder that even in infinite space, connection persisted. Morty felt that he was part of a rhythm, subtle but steady, and that his empathy, attention, and presence contributed to the quiet music of the multiverse. He thought about moments when he had been uncertain, afraid or hesitant, and he realized that companionship had always been there, quietly supporting him, whether in the form of a small friend, a distant mentor, or a fleeting presence in a corridor of light. These threads of connection had anchored him, providing stability and warmth in moments of doubt. Morty understood that growth, empathy, and quiet courage were nurtured as much by observation and presence as by action. Resting on a soft ledge, surrounded by shimmering spheres, Morty closed his eyes and let the gentle rhythm of connection settle around him. He felt gratitude for the friends who had taught him patience, empathy, and trust, and for the creatures whose quiet presence reflected and reinforced his growth. The hum of the multiverse wrapped around him, steady and warm, and Morty allowed himself to drift, knowing that the bonds he had nurtured, both visible and invisible, were enough to carry him safely into sleep. And in that gentle exhale, surrounded by light, warmth, and connection, Morty felt the reassurance that even in infinite spaces companionship persisted, soft and enduring, and that he was, in his own quiet way, both giving and receiving care across worlds, drifting deeper into rest with a heart full of subtle joy. Morty wandered along corridors that shimmered faintly, as if the walls themselves were breathing slowly in tune with the hum of the multiverse. The air smelled faintly of warm earth and distant rain, and it carried a subtle vibration, like a quiet song he could feel more than hear. Each step he took was deliberate, mindful, a small acknowledgement of the life and presence surrounding him. He realized that movement, even when slow and careful, could create connection and awareness, and that presence itself was a form of gentle care. A soft glow ahead drew his attention, a pool of light that rippled like liquid silver. Morty knelt beside it, and the reflection staring back at him was not just himself, but a version shaped by countless quiet moments, acts of empathy, patience, and attention he had given to others. He felt warmth bloom in his chest, a recognition that every small choice, every gentle gesture had left ripples in both himself and the worlds around him. The multiverse, he thought, was alive in subtle ways, and every observation, every act of noticing was part of its quiet pulse. A small creature appeared beside him, moving cautiously but with curiosity. Morty reached out, and it leaned into his hand, trusting, fragile yet open. He hummed a soft melody that seemed to harmonize with the gentle vibrations of the corridor. The creature's eyes closed in quiet contentment, and Morty felt the satisfaction of unseen heroism, a recognition that care, even in its simplest form, could create calm, confidence, and trust. The smallest gestures, he realized, often mattered most, echoing far beyond the moments in which they occurred. He walked further, noticing the patterns of light shifting across the corridors, each one pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Morty thought about the beings he had encountered, the moments when attention had transformed fear into comfort and uncertainty into quiet trust. He understood that his presence alone had power, that being aware, gentle, and patient created a resonance that could be felt without being seen. The multiverse responded not to force, but to care, and Morty felt a sense of calm pride in the subtle impact he carried. In a distant corridor, he observed a cluster of creatures who had once seemed lost, uncertain, and fragile. They moved with ease now, comforted by the invisible threads of connection he had nurtured. Morty smiled softly, realizing that guidance and empathy were not always loud or visible. They were often quiet, patient, and unnoticed, yet their effect could persist across time and space. Each small act, each soft gesture became part of the tapestry of life, delicate but enduring. Morty paused to rest on a ledge overlooking a pool of light, its surface rippling gently with reflections of stars and corridors. He allowed himself to reflect on his own growth, the patience he had learned, the empathy he had cultivated, and the gentle courage that had emerged from quiet observation. He realized that even in the vastness of the multiverse, where so many things seemed chaotic or unknowable, he had found a rhythm, a steady pulse of care that guided him and those around him. He thought of Rick, of course, whose lessons had been subtle yet profound, not through words meant to comfort, but through example, through challenges and chaos. Rick had taught him to notice, to observe, to move carefully and attentively. Morty understood now that these lessons were woven into the corridors of his mind, shaping his awareness and giving him the tools to offer quiet comfort and connection wherever he went. The lights in the corridor shifted slowly, casting gentle shadows that danced in rhythm with his heartbeat. Morty realized that the multiverse was not only vast, but tender, and that the care he offered and the care he received was a form of harmony with its pulse. Even the smallest attentions, the tilt of a head, the soft smile, the patient presence, were threads that contributed to the gentle music of existence. As he settled against the edge of the ledge, Morty felt the warm resonance of connection in every corner of his awareness. The small creature rested beside him, and the floating lights drifted lazily around them, as if pausing to notice the quiet harmony. He exhaled slowly, feeling the gentle rhythm of the multiverse wrap around him like a blanket, steady, warm, and unhurried. In this moment he understood that quiet empathy, patient attention, and the small gestures of care were enough to shape worlds, nurture trust, and carry him safely into sleep. And as the soft glow of the multiverse enfolded him, Morty allowed himself to drift, breathing slowly, feeling the gentle pulse of life, and knowing that the bonds he had nurtured, the care he had offered, and the quiet attention he carried would accompany him through the night, soft and enduring, carrying him gently into rest. Morty wandered through corridors that shimmered faintly, bending and folding like soft ribbons of light. Each step was deliberate, quiet, a meditation in motion. He had come to notice the small rhythms of the multiverse, the hum of shifting walls, the gentle flutter of unseen wings, the soft pulse of light moving through shadow. These subtle details no longer escaped him. Instead, they grounded him, teaching him patience and offering calm in the vastness of everything. A small creature padded beside him, its tiny footsteps almost silent but comforting in their presence. Morty smiled softly, feeling the warmth of shared awareness. The creature's trust was quiet, steady, and reciprocal, a reminder that connection did not need words to exist. Sometimes, Morty thought, the gentlest bonds were the strongest, carrying weight without effort and forming quietly over shared presence and care. He paused near a pool of silver light, its surface rippling as if it were breathing slowly. Reflections danced across the liquid surface, showing not only him, but echoes of moments he had long forgotten. A smile offered, a trembling hand steadied, a glance of recognition exchanged with a creature or a companion. Each memory carried a gentle resonance, a soft note in the ongoing symphony of attention, and care. Morty realized that even the smallest gestures had created ripples, moving outward through the multiverse in ways he could not always perceive but could feel deep within. As he walked further, Morty noticed the subtle ways his companions had shaped him. Rick's chaotic lessons had taught him awareness, attentiveness, and quiet courage. The small creatures and travelers he had encountered along the way had shown him patience, empathy, and the power of presence. Even fleeting interactions with beings whose names he would forget had left impressions, like faint brushstrokes on the canvas of his heart. Morty understood that life was a mosaic of these subtle exchanges, each one carrying meaning beyond the visible or immediate. A flicker of movement caught his attention, a creature perched on the edge of a corridor, hesitating, unsure. Morty approached slowly, mindful of the space he occupied, and offered a soft hum. The creature tilted its head, listening, and then leaned toward him, tentative but trusting. Morty felt the swell of quiet satisfaction in his chest, a reminder that small acts, offered without expectation, could carry deep significance. The multiverse responded to care, he realized, not to force or grandeur, but to gentle attention and consistent presence. He continued walking, reflecting on the invisible threads that connected him to the beings he had touched and who had touched him in return. The corridors shimmered softly, folding in on themselves like slow waves, yet Morty felt anchored, steady in the rhythm of awareness. He understood that empathy was not a finite resource. It expanded when shared, rippling outward with subtle strength. The quiet magic of noticing, of attending to the details, was as profound as any explosion of force or light. Morty paused on a smooth ledge overlooking a cascade of floating lights, each one drifting lazily as if suspended in time. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint hum of energy and the gentle pulse of life around him. Gratitude filled him, soft and steady, for the companions who had taught him, for the creatures who had trusted him, and for the lessons of patience, empathy, and awareness that shaped him each day. Even in the vast, infinite corridors, he felt anchored, connected, and capable of quiet influence. The corridors stretched on endlessly, yet the vastness did not feel lonely. Morty realized that connection existed in every corner, even where no eyes watched, even where no words were spoken. The small gestures of care, the patient observations, the calm presence he carried, these were his contributions, and they mattered more than he had ever imagined. The multiverse, he understood, was shaped as much by attention as by action, and his gentle awareness left ripples that endured. As sleep approached, Morty let himself settle against the edge of the ledge. The soft glow of floating lights, the gentle presence of his companion, and the quiet hum of the corridors wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He breathed slowly, feeling the subtle pulse of the multiverse harmonizing with his own. Gratitude, connection, and quiet care filled him, carrying him gently toward rest. The night embraced him softly, and he allowed himself to drift, knowing that the bonds he had nurtured and the awareness he carried would follow him into dreams, steady, enduring, and infinitely comforting. Morty moved slowly through corridors that seemed to breathe with quiet life. The walls shimmered softly, folding and curving in gentle waves, and every step he took felt intentional, calm, and observant. He had begun to notice the patterns that threaded through these spaces, the subtle flicker of lights, the faint hum of energy, the quiet ripple of air as creatures moved unseen. These rhythms, once unnoticed, now felt like a gentle guide, a soft current carrying him through the multiverse. A familiar creature padded beside him, small and cautious, yet steady in its trust. Morty reached out, and it brushed lightly against his hand, a delicate acknowledgement of presence and care. He realized again that connection did not always require words or grand gestures. Sometimes it existed purely in shared stillness, in gentle attention, in the calm awareness that another being was near. These were the quiet miracles, the understated magic of the corridors, and Morty began to feel their weight and warmth in his chest. He paused near a softly glowing pool, watching his reflection ripple across the surface. It was not only his image he saw, but echoes of the moments that had shaped him, the small acts of care he had offered to trembling creatures, the patient attention he had given to companions, the gentle guidance he had provided without expectation of reward. Each memory resonated softly, like a bell chiming in the distance, reminding him that even unseen actions carried meaning and that empathy, attentiveness, and patience were powerful forms of influence. The corridors stretched on, a labyrinth of light and shadow, and Morty began to recognize the invisible threads connecting him to others. Rick's subtle guidance had instilled observation, attentiveness, and quiet courage. The creatures and travelers he had encountered had nurtured patience, empathy, and trust. Even the fleeting presences of beings he barely remembered had left imprints, like faint brushstrokes on the canvas of his heart. Morty realized that life was not measured by grand deeds, but by these quiet, cumulative exchanges, delicate yet enduring. A flicker of movement caught his attention. A small creature perched hesitantly on a ledge. Morty knelt beside it, careful not to startle, and hummed a soft, comforting melody. The creature leaned into him slowly, trusting, fragile, yet willing to be seen. Morty felt a swell of satisfaction in his chest, a gentle confirmation that patience, attentiveness, and presence were often more powerful than action. Quiet care had a resonance that echoed far beyond the moment, shaping both himself and the spaces he traversed. He wandered further, noticing the subtle ways the multiverse responded to his awareness. Lights pulsed softly in rhythm with his thoughts, shadows shifted tenderly, and even the air seemed to hum with recognition. Morty understood that attention was a form of companionship, that observing and being present created safety and understanding in ways words could never fully capture. He breathed slowly, letting the soft rhythm of the corridors align with his heartbeat, and felt the warmth of connection ripple through him. Resting on a smooth ledge overlooking floating spheres of light, Morty reflected on the bonds he had nurtured. His small companion, Rick's distant guidance, the creatures who had trusted him, and the echoes of beings he had barely known, all formed threads that stretched across space and time, delicate but enduring. He realized that growth, empathy, and quiet courage were nurtured not only through action, but also through observation, patience, and gentle attention. The corridors seemed endless, yet Morty felt anchored. The soft glow of the spheres, the steady presence of his companion, and the hum of life around him provided comfort, reassurance, and calm. He allowed himself to breathe deeply, feeling the pulse of the multiverse align with his own. Gratitude, understanding, and quiet joy filled him, and he let himself drift gently, knowing that the connections he had cultivated, the empathy he carried, and the quiet care he practiced would accompany him into rest. And as sleep wrapped its soft, unhurried arms around him, Morty felt the certainty of presence, the comfort of connection, and the gentle rhythm of existence settling around his heart. He exhaled slowly, letting the corridors, the creatures, and the subtle lights carry him deeper into rest, calm, and quiet wonder, ready to awaken in another moment of awareness. Morty wandered along corridors that glimmered softly, their surfaces folding and bending as if the walls themselves were breathing. The air smelled faintly of warm earth and distant rain, carrying a vibration so subtle it could almost be felt rather than heard. Each step he took was quiet, deliberate, a slow acknowledgement of the presence surrounding him. He noticed the smallest details, the flicker of a shadow, the gentle hum of unseen wings, the soft ripple of light across a distant pool, and he felt the gentle pulse of the multiverse aligning with his own heartbeat. A small creature padded beside him, its tiny movements careful yet unwavering in trust. Morty reached out and let it brush lightly against his hand, feeling the warmth of presence in the contact. Connection, he realized, was not always loud or visible. It could exist quietly in shared stillness, in patient attention, in the simple acknowledgement of another being. These were the understated miracles of the corridors, subtle acts that carried depth, meaning, and gentle resonance. He paused near a pool of silver light, watching his reflection ripple across the surface. It was not just himself he saw, but echoes of the moments that had shaped him, the small gestures of care offered to trembling creatures, the patient attention given to companions, the quiet guidance he had extended without expectation of reward. Each memory resonated softly, a reminder that even the smallest actions could leave ripples across time and space, touching unseen hearts and shaping worlds in gentle, enduring ways. As he walked further, Morty noticed the invisible threads connecting him to others. Rick's subtle guidance had instilled attentiveness, observation, and quiet courage. Creatures and travelers he had met along the way had nurtured patience, empathy, and trust. Even fleeting encounters with beings he barely remembered had left impressions like soft brushstrokes on the canvas of his heart. Morty realized that life's significance often lay in these quiet, cumulative exchanges, delicate yet infinitely enduring. A flicker of movement caught his attention. A small creature perched hesitantly on a ledge. Morty knelt slowly, humming a soft, comforting melody. The creature leaned into him tentatively, fragile yet trusting, and Morty felt a swell of quiet satisfaction in his chest. Patience, attentiveness, and presence had more power than loud action. Quiet care resonated beyond the moment, shaping both the multiverse and himself in subtle, profound ways. He wandered further, noticing how the corridors themselves seemed to respond. Light pulsed gently, shadows shifted with a tender rhythm, and the very air hummed in recognition. Morty understood that observation itself was a form of companionship, that being present created safety and understanding without words. He breathed slowly, allowing the rhythm of the multiverse to align with his own heartbeat, and felt the warmth of connection ripple gently through him. Resting on a smooth ledge, Morty reflected on the bonds he had nurtured, his small companion, Rick's distant guidance, creatures who had trusted him, and fleeting echoes of beings he had barely known. All formed delicate, enduring threads that stretched across space and time. He realized that growth, empathy, and quiet courage were nurtured through attention, presence, and gentle care, not only through dramatic deeds. The corridors stretched endlessly, yet Morty felt anchored. The soft glow of floating lights, the steady presence of his companion, and the hum of life around him provided reassurance and calm. He allowed himself to breathe deeply, feeling the pulse of the multiverse align with his own. Gratitude, understanding, and quiet joy filled him, and he let himself drift gently, knowing the connections he had cultivated, the empathy he carried, and the quiet care he practiced would accompany him into rest. And as sleep enveloped him, Morty felt the comfort of presence, the reassurance of connection, and the gentle rhythm of existence settling around his heart. He exhaled slowly, letting the corridors, creatures, and soft lights carry him deeper into calm, wonder, and quiet rest, ready to awaken again with awareness and care. Morty walked slowly through the soft corridors, each step a gentle acknowledgement of the multiverse that stretched endlessly around him. The walls shimmered like liquid glass, folding and flowing as if breathing with quiet life. Light shifted subtly across the surfaces, casting delicate shadows that moved with him, soft and unhurried. Every detail, the faint hum of energy, the flutter of unseen wings, the ripple of distant reflections reminded him to notice, to pause, and to move with care. Beside him, his small companion padded quietly, its trust steady and unspoken. Morty reached out and let it brush against his hand, feeling warmth and connection in the simplest gesture. He understood now that the quietest bonds were often the strongest. Words were not always necessary. Presence, attention, and gentle care could carry meaning far beyond what could be spoken. These small acts created threads that stretched across the corridors, linking beings, hearts, and moments together in a tapestry of quiet understanding. He paused by a pool of shimmering light, its surface reflecting not only him, but echoes of the moments that had shaped his journey. A hand extended to steady a trembling creature, a soft melody hummed to calm fear, a patient gaze offered to one unsure of its place. All ripples of care and attentiveness resonated quietly across the multiverse. Morty felt the gentle weight of these memories, realizing that even unnoticed acts left lasting impressions, weaving connection, empathy, and growth through the endless corridors of existence. As he walked further, he noticed the invisible threads connecting him to others, Rick's guidance, subtle but constant, the creatures he had nurtured, and fleeting companions who had touched him in ways both profound and quiet. Each thread carried resonance, delicate yet strong, shaping both the multiverse and his own heart. Morty understood that quiet presence and gentle attention were as powerful as any overt act, creating a ripple of care that extended far beyond the immediate moment. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a small creature perched on a ledge, unsure but curious. Morty knelt, slowly, humming a soft tune that harmonized with the pulse of the corridors. The creature leaned in tentatively, seeking warmth, and Morty felt a quiet joy swell in his chest. Patience, attentiveness, and gentle care had a power all their own. Even the smallest gestures resonated, shaping the world in subtle and enduring ways. He continued along the softly glowing corridors, noticing the gentle responses of the multiverse. Light shimmered in patterns that matched his breathing, shadows bent gracefully around him, and the air seemed to hum with quiet acknowledgement. Morty realized that observation itself was an act of connection, that being present and aware created safety, understanding, and trust. He let the rhythm of the corridors align with his heartbeat, feeling a comforting resonance ripple through him. Resting on a ledge surrounded by floating spheres of soft light, Morty reflected on the bonds he had cultivated, the small companion who trusted him, Rick's distant guidance, and the creatures and echoes of beings he had barely known. Each formed delicate, enduring threads that carried meaning and warmth across space and time. Growth, empathy, and quiet courage were nurtured through attention, presence, and care, not always through action. The corridors stretched endlessly, yet Morty felt grounded. He exhaled slowly, letting gratitude and quiet joy fill him. The soft glow of the spheres, the presence of his companion, and the gentle hum of life created a cocoon of calm. As sleep folded around him, Morty allowed himself to drift, knowing the connections he had nurtured and the gentle awareness he carried would accompany him into rest, soft, steady, and enduring. And as the night embraced him, Morty felt the comfort of presence, the reassurance of connection, and the quiet rhythm of the multiverse settling around his heart. He exhaled slowly, letting the corridors, creatures, and shimmering lights carry him deeper into calm, wonder, and gentle rest. Ready for dreams to unfold, Morty rested on a smooth ledge, surrounded by the soft glow of drifting lights that pulsed gently like slow heartbeats. The corridors stretched endlessly in every direction, yet the vastness no longer felt overwhelming. It felt tender, alive, and strangely comforting. He breathed slowly, feeling the rhythm of the multiverse align with his own, a steady and reassuring cadence that seemed to say, "You are here, you are enough, you are seen." Beside him, his small companion curled into a quiet ball, the warmth of its presence blending seamlessly with the soft hum of the surroundings. Morty reached out and touched it lightly, and it responded with a gentle nuzzle. Connection, he realized, was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it existed in the smallest gestures, the softest touches, the calm acknowledgement of shared existence. Presence itself became a quiet magic, a thread that tied hearts and worlds together. He thought of all the beings he had encountered along the way, the creatures, companions, echoes of himself, and even Rick, whose guidance, though distant and sometimes chaotic, had shaped his awareness and empathy. Each connection, delicate yet enduring, had left traces in his heart and in the corridors around him. Morty understood that even fleeting moments of care could create ripples through infinite spaces, and he felt a quiet pride in knowing he had nurtured them. A pool of shimmering silver light reflected him softly, revealing not only his image but the accumulation of experiences that had defined his growth. Acts of empathy, patient observation, and gentle attention resonated across the surface like soft whispers. Morty exhaled slowly, letting the realization settle into his chest. Growth and understanding were found in quiet presence, in the care he offered and received, and in the subtle harmonies of the multiverse that responded to attention and love. The floating spheres of light drifted lazily around him, casting soft shadows and gentle illuminations. Morty observed them without urgency, letting the calmness of the scene fill him entirely. He recognized that the quiet moments, watching, listening, being present, were just as powerful as any grand adventure. They were the fabric of the multiverse, and he was a part of its slow, tender rhythm. Resting fully now, Morty allowed himself to sink into the embrace of the corridors, the hum of life, and the gentle pulse of the lights around him. Gratitude filled him, for companions, for guidance, for creatures and echoes, for small acts of care that had shaped him. Each thread, each bond, each quiet gesture created a melody that hummed beneath the surface of everything. Subtle yet enduring, he closed his eyes, letting the soft glow of the spheres and the warmth of his companion carry him into a deep, unhurried rest. The multiverse whispered around him, steady and calm, affirming that even in vastness, connection and care persisted. Morty exhaled slowly, feeling the gentle resonance of love, awareness, and quiet wonder settle around his heart. And as sleep wrapped him in its tender embrace, Morty knew the journey was not measured in moments of action, but in presence, attention, and empathy. And somewhere he's still out there, noticing, caring, and drifting gently through the corridors of infinite light. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man.